We have a couple of gentlemen who've got some, I think, what you will find very captivating stories to tell tonight for the remainder of our dinner and our dessert. And it is my pleasure to introduce Van Reiner as our first brief speaker. For those of you that have never spent any time in Baltimore's Inner Harbor, there's been a whole lot going on there over the past 20 to 30 years. It is a remarkable place today, and for those of you that have never talked to somebody about what it used to be like, it is something worth doing and exploring because it is a very different place today than it once was. One of the anchors of Baltimore's Inner Harbor, of course, is the Maryland Science Center, and Van is the director of the Science Center. And Van, I think more interestingly for many of us in the environmental community, spent many, many years with Bethlehem Steel, and specifically at the Sparrows Point facility. He is an engineer by training and somebody who has a very solid command of engineering, chemistry, and all the kinds of things that we would love our kids to enjoy at the Maryland Science Center. So Van, welcome to us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. With that introduction, this is even more daunting than I anticipated. Yes, I did spend a number of years with Bethlehem Steel. However, only the last 3 years of my career were at Sparrows Point, okay? Okay? I was there when I convinced the board that they needed to spend the money for the sewage treatment plant, okay? All right. I masqueraded as an engineer. I'm really just a poor inorganic chemist. And I masqueraded as an engineer and a metallurgist and used to make them all mad when I told them, there's nothing to it. Anyway, I'm here not representing the Maryland Science Center solely, but the Waterfront Partnership of Baltimore. The Science Center and others, and I'll introduce my colleague in a minute, about 5 years ago decided we needed to do something at the Inner Harbor or it was going to totally lose its vitality. And we formed what we now call the Waterfront Partnership of Baltimore to essentially spruce the place up. And we started with just cleaning it up. We made a pact with the city. We're a public-private partnership. Long story short, we can tax, we can use that money to keep the Inner Harbor clean. And initially we focused on floating trash in the harbor because we said that's ugly and people aren't going to come to the Inner Harbor to have fun, to make purchases, to do business when the harbor looks so bad. Well, that led to an effort around sustainability. What are we going to do to sustain the place? And we got to talking to some people, and we hired a firm in Baltimore called Biohabitats to start talking to us about sustainability. And so we learned and started doing some things about reduce our use of fertilizer at the Inner Harbor. We're going to zero fertilizer. We wanted to go to native plants. We have new receptacles for cigarette butts. We have trash cans. We're trying to do all the good things that good citizens do. And then a couple of years ago, there was a significant fish kill in the Inner Harbor. And there was a terrible, terrible odor. And those of us who work and depend on people coming down to the Inner Harbor for our livelihood were dismayed that people said, well, I can't come down there, it stinks. And so we did some investigation, and sure enough, what am I going to tell you don't already know? We had, because of the nutrients, we had an algae bloom, and ultimately sucked the oxygen out of the water and the fish died. Happens all the time, right? Well, we decided that we needed to do something. We just couldn't stand to have that happen again. So we started to talk about what do we have to do to clean up the water. We're trying to clean the trash so that by sight it looks good, but that wasn't good enough. I said to somebody earlier, about 4 years ago, Red Bull staged their Flugtag, and that's human-powered flight. If you didn't see it, you missed a real treat. And they launched in front of the Science Center, and what did they launch into? The harbor. Well, one of the big things from the city standpoint was we had to have a triage tent on the harbor so when they pulled the people out of the water, they could be triaged. And I said, triaged? For what? And they said, no, that we have to decontaminate them. Okay. I learned something. So anyway, we got to talking about what could we do, and Biohabitats identified some low-hanging fruit. And we said, well, that's great, but you know what? We're not going to get anything done without a goal. And I have this theory that if you can't set a goal that you really have to work hard to achieve, why bother? I call them BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. Well, we set ourselves one, and that's to make the inner harbor of Baltimore swimmable and fishable by 2020. So, you know, there's some people who did a survey of the general public, and they put it on YouTube, and I watched it, and I was expecting people to say, yeah, right, how are you going to do that? You know, geez, why don't you pick something you can accomplish? But the general public said, why not? It's a great idea, and they need to be successful. So we had a whole list of things that we knew we needed to get done. We also knew that there was a whole lot we didn't know. But in terms of generating a lot of excitement, you see a picture to my right, your left. We decided, and I guess I really did, I chair the Sustainability Committee, that we needed to do something that was very visible, that would cause people to say, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And what's it going to do? And so we came up with this idea of a floating marshland. I mean, the inner harbor used to be surrounded by marshes. Well, we took care of that. It's called development. We have hard bulkheads. We have no possibility of filtering any water before it goes into the harbor. So we decided that a floating wetland was a good idea. Well, then somebody said, well, you need to get a permit. Oh, all right. All right, so it just so happens that in my role as the president of the Maryland Science Center, I had an appointment with Sherry Wilson, who then was the secretary for the Maryland Department of the Environment. And at the end of my meeting with her, I said, now, Madam Secretary, I have one more thing I want to talk to you about. And I want you to help us get permission to put these floating islands in the harbor. And she said, where do you want to put them? I said, I want to put them around the no-fly zone around the World Trade Center. You know, since 9/11, we've got bollards and wires. No boats can go there, so what good is it? Let's do something with it. And she looked at me like, oh boy, here we go. And I said, no, wait a minute. We've got the plan. I shared plans with her, and I said, I'm not asking you to support it financially. We have the funds. The Baltimore Water Alliance had some funds, and they made them available to us for this project. So I said, we have the plan, we have the funds, but we need your help to get the approval. And she said, we'll think about it. The next day I got a phone call from somebody in the department and said, we are going to help you we're going to walk you through it. You're going to get this approved. And by the way, we know that the National Aquarium for 2 years has had an application and we haven't done anything. We're going to approve that one. And they said, now there's a lot of hurdles you have to cross, and I had no idea there were so many people that had to approve it. I mean, we had the Coast Guard, which I expected, the Army Corps, which I kind of expected, the city, well, it makes sense. But the last one almost torpedoed us, and that was the Port Authority. And I said, what ships do you unload by the World Trade Center? Didn't make any difference. Well, anyway, they helped us get it. So what's unique about this? Well, it's an artificial marsh. What I think is the most exciting piece about it is it floats. And what do we use for flotation? The very same discarded plastic, soda, and water bottles we've been cleaning out of the harbor for the last 5 years. So, yeah, okay, so we use cedar wood, we have UV-resistant geogrid, we have plant media mats. But the thing I focus on is we're taking trash and we're putting it to good use. Well, the day that we floated them over, oh, I should tell you that it's a little education process too. The students at the Living Classrooms, which is a charter school in Baltimore, constructed them with the help of biohabitats. They did all the work. Matter of fact, they are so excited about it, they've built about 10 more that we don't have permission to put anywhere. But they don't care because it's an educational piece for them. So we did create a buzz. I can't tell you the number of times I've been walking by to see somebody looking at it, scratching their head, and I walk up and say, pretty neat, isn't it? Well, what is it? What does it do? Well, it provides a little habitat, does a little cleaning. Well, why is it so small? We're only allowed 200 square feet. So there's 400 square feet total of floating wetlands in the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. 200 square feet at the World Trade Center, 200 square feet by the aquarium. What I'd like to do is encase that entire area, that no boat zone, if you will, and make that a floating wetland, because people will see it. Now, I was asked to speak about how technology can help this effort. I have to tell you something. In my opinion, all the technology we need to clean the Inner Harbor, and I think that the entire Chesapeake Bay, already exists. It does. You know what it is. I'm learning what it is, but it exists. What we don't have is the public will to do something about it. Oh, no, no, no. We don't have the political will because we don't have the public will. So, I'm at the Maryland Science Center. Our focus is to excite students about science and encourage them to pursue careers in science, engineering, technology, and mathematics. So we have floating islands. We have a BHAG. We have a big, hairy, audacious goal. And at the Science Center, I've got a colleague who constructed an artificial small floating island because she's teaching a class about it. We built a green roof. We're teaching a class about what the value of green roofs. We have a rain garden. We are actually teaching students about the value of that. If we teach the students and they buy in, for those of you who've raised kids, you know when they're onto something, how do you tune them out forever? You can't. We have engaged people in Baltimore. We've engaged the current mayor of Baltimore. People are endorsing it. They're waiting for the rest of our story. So what do we do now? Well, if we're going to convince John and Jane Q. Public that there's a problem that's solvable, we have to tell them, where are we now? What's the problem now? And I got to tell you, MS4, TMDL, forget it. You know, they hear it, dial tones in their eyes. They'll glaze over and they'll go, okay, it's all that's mumbo jumbo again, and they're not going to pay any attention. So we've hired the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science to collect all of the water data that's out there. And I got to tell you, I was at that meeting. I can't believe how much data is out there. We got to put it all together, and we got to make sense of it. We fundamentally, and you in this room know the causes of nutrients, bacteria, you know what they are. But the public doesn't understand. So when we get our baseline, we've already got the goal, because the standards are the standards. And if we exceed the standards, it'll be swimmable and fishable. And so we have to educate, and we have to do a good PR campaign. And that's what I think my contribution is. I want to help educate the students, the general public, and then the politicians will pay attention. Now, call me naive, but that's okay. I believe it. So that's my part of the story, and if you haven't guessed, I really believe it.